Hello and welcome to Mrs. PM Reads. How you doing? It's good to see you today and I hope you're doing well. I'm just checking what chapter we're on. Today we are going to continue in the book A Man Called Ove by Fredrik Backman. And we will be in chapter 9. And so what we found in chapter 8 was a little bit more about Ove and his personality and the fact that he's honest and has principles. So I'm going to turn off, give me 1 second, I'm going to turn off the AC so I have less sound, sorry. There we go. Now you should be able, hopefully, to hear me better. All right. So we are in chapter 9 of A Man Called Ove by Fredrik Backman. They say the brain functions quicker while it's falling, as if the sudden explosion of kinetic energy forces the mental faculties to accelerate until the perception of the exterior world goes into slow motion. So Ove had time to think of many different things, mainly radiators. Because there are right and wrong ways of doing things, as we all know, and even though it was many years ago, and Ove could no longer remember exactly what solution he'd considered to be the right one in the argument about which central heating system should be adopted by the Residents Association, he did remember very clearly that Rune's approach had been wrong. But it wasn't just the central heating system. Rune and Ove had known each other for almost 40 years, and they had been at loggerheads for at least 37 of them. Ove could not, in all honesty, remember how it all started. It wasn't the sort of dispute where you did remember. It was more an argument where the little disagreements had ended up so entangled that every new word was treacherously booby-trapped, and in the end, it wasn't possible to open one's mouth at all without setting off at least 4 unexploded mines from earlier conflicts. Whew. It was the sort of argument that had just run and run and run until one day it just ran out. It wasn't really about cars, properly speaking, but Ove drove a Saab after all, and Rune drove a Volvo. Anyone could have seen it wouldn't work out in the long run. In the beginning, though, they had been friends, or at least friends to the extent that men like Ove and Rune were capable of being friends. Mostly for the sake of their wives, obviously. All 4 of them had moved into the area at the same time, and Sonia and Anita became best friends as only women married to men like Ove and Rune could be. Ove recalled that he had at least not disliked Rune in those early years, as far as he could remember. They were the ones who set up the Residents Association, Ove as chairman and Rune as assistant chairman. They had stuck together when the council wanted to cut down the forest behind Ove and Rune's houses in order to build even more houses. Of course, The council claimed that those construction plans had been there for years before Rune and Ove moved into their houses, but one did not get far with Rune and Ove using that sort of argument. "It's war, you so-and-sos." Rune had roared at them down the telephone line, and it truly was. Endless appeals and writs and petitions and letters to newspapers. A year and a half later, the council gave up and started building somewhere else instead. That evening, Rune and Ove had drunk a glass of whiskey each on Rune's patio. They didn't seem overly happy about winning, their wives pointed out. Both men were rather disappointed that the council had given up so quickly. These 18 months had been some of the most enjoyable of their lives. Is no one prepared to fight for their principles anymore? Rune had wondered. Not a damn one, Ove had answered. And then they set a toast to unworthy enemies. That was long before the coup d'etat at the Residents Association, of course, and before Rune bought a BMW. Idiot, thought Ove on that day, and also today, all these years after, and every day in between, actually. How the heck are you supposed to have a reasonable conversation with someone who buys a BMW? Ove used to ask Sonia when she wondered why the two men could not have a reasonable conversation anymore. And at that point, Sonia used to find no other course but to roll her eyes while muttering, "You're hopeless." Ove wasn't hopeless in his own view. He just had a sense of there needing to be a bit of order in the greater scheme of things. He felt one should not go through life as if everything was exchangeable, as if loyalty was worthless. Nowadays, people change their stuff so often that any expertise in how to make things last was becoming useless. Quality. No one cared about that anymore. Not Rune or the other neighbors, and not those managers in the place where Ove worked. Now everything had to be computerized, as if one couldn't build a house until some consultant in a too small shirt figured out how to open a laptop, as if that was how they built the Colosseum and the pyramids. They'd managed to build the Eiffel Tower in 1889, but nowadays one couldn't come up with the bloody drawings for a one-story house without taking a break for someone to run off and recharge their cell phone. This was a world where one became outdated before one's time was up. An entire country standing up and applauding the fact that no one was capable of doing anything properly anymore. The unreserved celebration of mediocrity. No one could change tires, install a dimmer switch, lay some tiles, plaster a wall, fix their own taxes. These were all forms of knowledge that had lost their relevance and the sort of things Ove had once spoken of with Rune. And then Rune went out and bought a BMW. Was a person hopeless because he believed there should be some limits? Ove didn't think so. And yes, he didn't exactly remember how that argument with Rune had started, but it had continued. It had been about radiators and central heating systems and parking slots and trees that had to be felled and snow clearance and lawnmowers and rat poison in Rune's pond. For more than 35 years, they had paced about on their identical patios behind their identical houses while throwing meaningful glares over the fence. And then, one day, about a year ago, it all came to an end. Rune became ill. Never came out of the house anymore. Ove didn't even know if he still had the BMW. And there was a part of him that missed that bloody old sod. So, as they say, the brain functions quicker when it's falling. Like thinking thousands of thoughts in a fraction of a second. In other words, Ove had a good deal of time to think after he's kicked over the stool and fallen and landed on the floor with a lot of angry thrashing. He lies there on his back, looking up for what seems like half an eternity at the hook, still up on the ceiling. Then, in shock, he stares at the rope, which has snapped into two long stumps. This society, thinks Ove, can't even manufacture rope anymore? He swears profusely while he furiously tries to untangle his legs. How can one fail to manufacture a rope? How can you get rope wrong? No, there's no quality anymore, Ove decides. He stands up, brushes himself down, peers around the room and ground floor of his row house, feels his cheeks burning. He's not quite sure if it's because of anger or shame. He looks at the window and the drawn curtains as if concerned that someone may have seen him. Isn't that bloody typical, he thinks. You can't even kill yourself in a sensible way anymore. He picks up the snapped rope and throws it into the kitchen wastebasket, folds up the plastic sheeting and puts it in the IKEA bags, puts back the hammer action drill and the drill bits in their cases, then goes out and puts everything back in the shed. He stands out there for a few minutes and thinks about how Sonia always used to nag him to tidy the place up. He always refused, knowing that any new space would immediately be an excuse to go out and buy more useless stuff with which to fill it. And now it's too late for tidying, he confirms. Now there's no longer anyone who wants to go out and buy useless stuff. Now the tidying would just result in a lot of empty gaps, and Ove hates empty gaps. He goes to the workbench, picks up an adjustable wrench and a little plastic watering can. He walks out, locks the shed, and tugs at the door handle 3 times. Then goes down the little pathway between the houses, turns off by the last mailbox, and rings a doorbell. Anita opens the door. Ove looks at her without a word, sees Rune sitting there in his wheelchair, vacantly staring out of the window. It seems that's all he's done these last few years. "Where have you got the radiators then?" mutters Ove. Anita smiles, a surprised little smile, and nods with equally mixed eagerness and confusion. "Oh, Ove, that's dreadfully kind of you. If it's not too much Ove steps into the hall without letting her finish what she's saying or removing his shoes. Yeah, this crappy day is already ruined anyway. And that is the end of chapter 9. Goodness. Well, we are glad that Ove is okay. All right, you guys, let me just put up my little subscribe sign because I need to remind you. I don't need to. I like to remind you that if you haven't clicked the subscribe button, go ahead and please do that. And then when you see the little bell tab there, click on that and you will get an update when a new video posts. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time for chapter 10. Bye.